So Kafka recently received a buff which turned her old E1 into one of her traces, which made her so much stronger now, and I just feel like because of that I should probably make a video and just convey to you guys how strong she is and why I'm going to skip Silver Wolf and pull for her, just like what I said yesterday in my stream. I have talked about why I'm skipping Silver Wolf, but I'll just briefly go over it so that for those who haven't watched my stream yesterday will know what I was talking about. So first of all, this reason is a little bit more personal, and it's because of how Silver Wolf just simply makes the game a bit too easy for me. So you don't have to agree with me, but I still think that if I do get hit on my account is just going to be a bit too strong in terms of how I'm just going to clear content a bit too easily, and eventually once all my characters are at level 80, all min-maxed, with their best in slot relics and light cones, with Silver Wolf, I think the game is just going to turn into an auto clicker, and I just don't want that to happen, and that's reason one for why I'm not going to pull for Silver Wolf. The second one being, since Silver Wolf's E implants a weakness of a character in your team onto the target enemy, to me it just seems a bit dumb that I'll need to pull for a 5-star character so that I can break a certain enemy's toughness bar. In reality, I can simply put a character into my team which is of that element type, and there we go, I've got that problem solved. So I don't really see why I'll need to pull for a 5-star character, and I would much rather spend my star up passes on characters that I actually like, in this case on Kafka. And the third and final reason is very obvious, it's because of how Kafka is probably going to come out in 1.2. And I don't really want to spend my star passes because currently I've got I think around 145 pulls saved up, and I don't really want to spend them all and make it so that it's not guaranteed that I'm going to get Kafka. And after discussing it very thoroughly in yesterday's stream, I have decided to skip Silver Wolf and spend all of my Stellar Jade on Kafka instead, because of how I think she's going to make the game interesting, and I just really like her character design overall. Just like you Kafka sims out there, I'm going to explain why pulling for Kafka is probably going to be the thing that you should do when 1.2 comes out. And I know I've already gone through this a tiny bit during my why you shouldn't pull for Jingyuan video, but after the buff that she received recently, I think there's more of a reason why you should pull for her. And let me go through that after I explain what her kit does, because I think a lot of you guys out there are still not that familiar with her kit, and I think after understanding what her kit does, you'll see why I said that she's going to make the game very interesting. So first of all, let's just start with her normal attack. So she deals a single instance of lightning damage to one single enemy, which deals 50% of her total attack at level 1. So moving on to her skill, she basically deals attack to one main enemy and then also deal a slightly lower multiplier of damage to an enemy adjacent to it. And if the enemy when hit is already receiving DOTs, all the DOTs will immediately produce damage equal to 60% of the original damage at level 1. And last but not least, she deals lightning damage to all enemies with a 100% base chance for all the enemies that are hit becoming shocked and immediately taking the shock damage equivalent to 72% of the DOT's original damage at level 1. And this shock effect lasts for 2 turns, and while the enemies that are hit by the ultimate are shocked, they will receive lightning DOT damage equivalent to 95% of Kafka's attack at the beginning of each turn. So before even looking into the talents and also the traces that Kafka also has, this alone I think is already enough of a reason why you should pull for Kafka. Simply because, except for Sample and maybe one other character, I'm not really sure because I don't really play DOT characters that much in Star Rail, I think Kafka is the first ever 5-star character whose kit is revolved around DOT damage. I might be wrong, I'm not too sure. Either way, the point I'm trying to make is that currently in Star Rail, the way that we deal damage is very direct. For example, if you take Sealy, she attacks, she deals an instant of damage, boom. Although she might be able to do quantum DOT damage through the entangled state when she breaks enemies' toughness bar, her kit ultimately doesn't revolve around DOT damage, and instead you would want to just build her raw damage output. And in this case, Kafka's main damage output is all from her DOT. As you can see, if I just level these traces up to, I don't know, maybe level 5 and level 8 and also level 8 like this, you can see that the multipliers are still not that high. For instance, the lightning damage that is dealt from her skill only does 140% of her attack to the main enemy and only 52.5% to adjacent enemies. And for her burst, she deals less than 100% of her attack to enemies. And yeah, personally I think it's good to have characters like Kafka who deal damage in like a different way, as in she deals damage in a less traditional way, unlike Sealy who I've just mentioned, and unlike Jingyuan who also deals damage through his lightning lord and also through non-DOT sources. Kafka, when compared to these two past 5-star banner characters, there's a clear difference in how they get their main damage output, and I think it's a good thing to always change it up a bit in the way that we play Star Rail. If we always stick to one singular team, it's gonna get boring, and eventually most of you, maybe not, maybe only some of you, will quit Genshin like you did. And I think in 1.2 when Kafka comes out, we'll be already at least 2.5 months into the game. And I think that is around time we get sort of a change in the way that we play the game, in the way that we get satisfying numbers. And although on paper DOT might seem inferior to more traditional ways of dealing damage, I think eventually after building Kafka fully and min-maxing her damage output is going to be satisfying and no one is going to regret pulling for her. Let's just move on to her talent and also her technique to better illustrate this. So first of all, I think this is the part where she received the buff in which the previous E1 has been incorporated into her talent, and now it is something like this. So essentially after characters other than Kafka deals damage, she immediately launches a follow-up attack, and a very nice thing about this is how every single time she launches a follow-up attack, there's a 100 base chance of increasing the DOT inflicted by 15% for 2 turns. As for her technique, she attacks the enemy sort of like Serval's technique, and it deals a small portion of lightning damage to enemies. However, here's the catch. In addition to that, all enemies will have 100% base chance of becoming shocked for 3 turns, and while being shocked, enemies will receive DOT damage equivalent to 50% of Kafka's attack at the beginning of each turn. From what I can see, I think Kafka's technique and talent just basically refines her kit even more and just makes her already very versatile utility even more versatile in this case. The main thing is that not only is she helping her teammates by increasing the DOT damage that they deal, for example you might be playing with Sample or maybe even Serval, their DOT damage is also going to get increased, but at the same time her personal damage output is also increased by her talent, which means that she's going to have a very strong synergy with most characters. Even if for example you're pairing Kafka up with Sealy might break enemies' toughness bars, applying the entangled effect, and after they take entangled damage, the entangled damage is going to get increased by Kafka's talent here. To me, I don't think Kafka is going to be a very hard character to work around in terms of team building, and so if you're wondering whether Kafka is going to be a bit niche and if you're a little bit worried about her team requirements, don't worry, she's going to be a very versatile character and you guys aren't going to have any problems when building a team around her. And I'll also show you guys these traces here, which are sort of like her passive talents. So the first one here applies to the DOT damage that is immediately inflicted at the beginning of turns. Here we can see that the damage increase is going to scale off of 15% of Kafka's break effect up to a maximum of a 30% increase of her break effect. The second one is also very useful if you want to get her ultimate back a bit earlier. And the last one, and although here it might be phrased a little bit unclearly, I'm assuming that the ultimate will also receive an extra 20% base chance to shock enemies. I'm not too sure, but I think that is the case. Also, from the minor trace upgrades that we can see here, break effect plus 5.3%, break effect plus 8%, break effect plus 10.7%, I think it is safe to say that building break effect on Kafka is also going to be very beneficial, because if Kafka breaks enemies' toughness bars, she's also going to apply another instance of shock onto enemies. And one thing that I want to point out is how Kafka is a DOT oriented damage dealer, meaning that she doesn't really need to have crit rate or crit damage. Not needing to worry about the crit rate or crit ratio that Kafka has is an advantage to Kafka in my opinion, since when you grind for her relics you can focus more on break effect and also attack, and I think this is one of those extra bonuses when building Kafka because you can be a bit more lenient when grinding for her relics. And before I move on to the next part of the video, I'm just going to quickly go over her eidolons, because I think that maybe getting 1 or 2 eidolons for Kafka isn't going to be a bad idea at all. The website that I'm using for today's video, Honkai Lab, they suggest that you get E4 and then E2 and E1, and this is ordered according to how valuable the website thinks each of the eidolons are. But let's be honest, unless you are a Giga Well, you're probably not going to get E4, and it's more likely that you're going to stop at E1 or E2. So let me just go over what each of her eidolons do. First of all, E1, which is absolutely insane because of how this allows characters who are paired up with Kafka, like for example Sample, to have an increased damage output from their DOT. And E2 is just another very convenient thing to have, I think, because of how it just increases the overall weakness break efficiency of Kafka. Moving on to the E4, this is where the Giga Wells are gonna feel truly rewarded. This increases the duration of the DOT damage increase by an extra 1 turn, and this effect can be stacked up to a total of 2 times. I'm assuming that every single time her talent is triggered, so whenever she deals a follow-up attack, this is also going to get triggered, which means that towards the middle of a stage, you'll be extending the DOT damage increase by another 2 turns, with a total of 4 turns having increased DOT damage from your characters. You're going to end stages quicker, and you're going to find that the game is going to be a bit easier in terms of how you're going to defeat more enemies in a shorter amount of time. As for her E6, after getting this, your Kafka is just going to be completely broken because of how the damage multiplier of the shock damage dealt by her ultimate is just going to get a flat 100% increase in damage, and the shock duration is also getting an extension by 1 turn, meaning meaning that your enemies until they get defeated are just going to be shocked essentially, because every single turn your Kafka is going to attack. Just think about how broken that is. If you're thinking of wailing on a character in Honkai Star Rail, I'd say wail for Kafka and get her E6, because after that you will never need to pull for another 5-star character ever again. You're going to be able to clear any sort of content in Honkai Star Rail with Kafka's E6. Now, free-to-play players or whales, we all can agree that pulling for Kafka is going to be a good idea for your account. Just pull for Kafka. I promise you, you will never ever regret making this decision. Like, if you're still not convinced, I'll show you a few more reasons why you should pull for her. Like, look at her! In what parallel universe would anyone skip her? And also, one last thing. Just have a look at this.
Time to say bye.
Oh my days. If you're telling me that you're going to skip after seeing this, I don't know, maybe you should just give me all your stellar jade. I'll put it to good use. Anyway, this is going to be it for today's video. The last part is all jokes, of course, and you should be the one who decides how you're going to spend your stellar jade. But I still hope that you now understand why us Kafka simps will be pulling for her. Either way, like and subscribe if you're new, because it really helps me out, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!